Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
So happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. So I thought, just as a little bit of insider baseball, you might find it interesting that I am broadcasting the podcast for today from the undisclosed location in New Mexico. As part of my radio program, we were setting up a studio, obviously, at home and setting up a studio down here in New Mexico. So I'm really happy. I got to admit, I'm kind of giddy about the fact that I'm able to do the podcast from wherever I want to do it, and doing it from New Mexico over the long Memorial Day weekend has been fun. And in fact, I'm thinking about spending a couple of days down here. Tamara has to go back. So I'm thinking about spending a couple of days down here, just me and Greta the Leonberger, having a little bit of fun. So that's the inside baseball for today. The other thing that I just wanted to mention at the top of the podcast, instead of at the end of the podcast, is to remind you that if you want to subscribe to the podcast now on iTunes, you can do that. You simply look for, if you go to the podcast app on iTunes, and you look for Michael Brown or Michael Brown Unplugged, you'll find it there, and I certainly would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast, and if you would leave me a 5-star rating, and if you have time to do a written review. That would be fantastic. Then the other thing I would suggest, which I normally do at the end of the program, but I thought I would do it at the beginning of the program today, is to remind you that the easiest way to follow me on any of the social media platforms, whether that is YouTube, whether that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is to simply go to my website, michaelbrowntoday.com, michaelbrowntoday.com, and there you'll find all of the social media icons. You can like the Facebook page, and then you can ask to join the Facebook discussion group where people who want to can ask me questions, and sometimes I'll ask you guys questions, because I'm always curious in terms of the audience, because I don't have the text messaging service that I had at the radio program, which I'm going to try to figure out a way to do in the podcast for you guys to be able to ask me questions or things that you would like for me to talk about or would like for me to analyze. So you can do all of that by going to the webpage, michaelbrowntoday.com. So let's get started, because there's a lot to talk about today, and I want to get through as much of it as I can. The first one was a story that occurred on CBS this morning over the long weekend that kind of caught me off guard. Well, it didn't catch me off guard. It just made me wonder, what's the real agenda here? CBS reports about the United States finally returning to the moon in 2024. Because I'm all for going to the moon, and quite frankly, I think we ought to really be building up our space capabilities. And I understand that SpaceX, I understand that Jeff Bezos, I understand that Tesla, what's his name, Elon Musk, I understand that all of these guys are doing all these different things to try to get the private sector into space, and I'm all for that. Don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely for that. But in terms of the United States government getting somebody back to the moon, I think we should be doing that. That we have not done any of the things that China is doing. For example, China has recently landed a lunar module on the back side of the moon, sometimes wrongly called the dark side of the moon. And part of that exploration is to find water, to look for minerals, and to see what they can exploit on the moon. What are we doing? We're not doing anything. But now NASA has decided that we are planning to return to the moon in 2024, but there's an agenda.
We like surprises, don't we?
Yep.
Yes, we do like surprises. Well, guess what? In a surprise announcement, NASA revealed a new name for its moon program, Artemis. She is a Greek goddess of the moon and twin sister of Apollo. Well, NASA picked the name in hopes of having the first woman land on the moon by 2024. And now,
I have no problem with that. If there is a qualified female, if there is a qualified gay, if there's a qualified, I don't care what, a qualified, whatever, maybe your gender is one thing on this side of the moon, and on the other side of the moon, maybe your gender is something else. I don't care about that. I'm more concerned about the scientific exploits that we can make by going back to the moon. Why do we have to have everything about, well, we're going to have the first black, we're going to have the first white, we're going to have the first Indian, we're going to have the first woman? How about we focus on the scientific exploits?
Meet that deadline, the Trump administration wants Congress to approve an additional $1.6 billion for NASA on top of its $21 billion budget for next year. Mark Strassman spoke with the man who's responsible for making the moonshot happen.
50 years ago this July, 2 Americans left the first footprints in lunar dust. No other country has matched Apollo's moonwalkers. But 5 have sent probes and robots, including Israel and China just this year.
It's not by accident that so many countries around the world right now are going to the moon. And not all of them are going to the moon just to collect rocks. It's a strategic imperative that the United States have a presence there as well.
Yeah, a strategic imperative that the United States has a presence as well. Hallelujah. Let's do that. But why do we have to be concerned about whether or not we're the first with a woman? Do you think, and look, I'm not trying to compare us to the Chinese or to the Ruskies or anybody else trying to get to the moon, but why are we so focused? Everything that we do is now tied to identity politics. So we've got to somehow forget about what sort of scientific discoveries we can make, forget about being able to find, some rare metals that might help us, make some better products or something. Oh, no. We've got to have the first woman on the moon.
When Jim Bridenstine became NASA's administrator last year, a planned moon landing was a decade away.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's just not good enough.
But in March, Vice President Mike Pence lit a fire under NASA and its contractors.
If NASA's not currently capable of landing American astronauts on the moon in 5 years, we need to change the organization, not the mission.
We've seen over and over again administrations change and projects get canceled with billions of dollars wasted of the taxpayer. We're going to shorten the time scale. We're going to make this a reality.
That starts by accelerating development of NASA's new mega rocket called the Space Launch System, or SLS. On top would sit NASA's new crew capsule called Orion. Roughly 240,000 miles from Earth, Orion eventually would dock with a planned lunar orbiting space station called Gateway. But the Artemis program lacks one key component.
What's the most significant piece of the budget increase?
The landing capability. Lunar landers are difficult to build. They take time, they take money, and we don't have that capability.
Not yet.
Not yet. That's the most difficult part to build. We've done it once. We are about to celebrate 50 years and proving once again that the government goes off on these tangents. Why haven't we spent the past 50 years focused on whether or not, and look, I'm not trying to denigrate the shuttle program. I'm not trying to denigrate anything else that NASA has done. Well, maybe with the exception of NASA trying to do the Muslim outreach that they were trying to do under the Obama administration. But think about this. So we landed a lunar module on the moon for the first time in 1969. We're now going to celebrate that 50-year anniversary this year. And now NASA is telling us that the most difficult part of landing someone on the moon is building the landing module. I just got to ask, what have we been doing for the past 50 years?
But private industry wants that contract.
This is Blue Moon.
Last week, billionaire Jeff Bezos introduced Blue Moon, his space company's design for a lunar lander. Lockheed Martin also has a design.
5 years to get to the moon. How is that not fairly intense schedule pressure?
If somebody says this isn't safe, ultimately they have the authority to throw a red flag and say stop. It is more important for us that our astronauts be safe.
And I totally agree with that. My question to you is, they're asking for an additional $1.6 billion. Does that number ring a bell? $1.6 billion? Oh, I don't know, for a wall? $5 billion, $6 billion for additional border security? Yeah, we're not going to give NASA $1.6 billion. Oh, there'll be some people in Congress that will support this program and will earmark or somehow get the $1.6 billion to do it. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom on the Tuesday after Memorial Day weekend, but aren't we a little behind the eight ball here? If we're really going to catch up, let's catch up. And if catching up means we got to spend $1.6 billion, let's do that. And let's not do this. Let's not spend all of our time focused on whether or not we get the first black, the first gay, the first woman, the first, handicapped person, whatever. Forget the freaking identity politics. Why does everything have to involve identity politics? Make the public policy decision if we're going to go to the moon and go to the moon. And if we are, may the best person win one of those spots. And maybe this is naive on my part, but I thought that after the Memorial Day weekend and after the tiff between Nancy Pelosi and Trump and Schumer on the infrastructure meeting, I kind of thought that when Nancy Pelosi went back and said that, impeachment is one of those difficult things to do and the American people just aren't there yet, naively, I really kind of thought that impeachment might be off the table and that we might be able to come back on a Tuesday and there wouldn't be all this discussion about impeachment. Was I ever so wrong? Congressman Al Green.
So the stakes are very high, Congressmember Green. Right after you talk to us, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is holding a meeting with the Democrats as you push for her to open an inquiry into impeachment. Why are you calling for this, and why have you done this for the last 2 years?
Thank you for having me, Ms. Goodman and Mr. Gonzalez. I'm here because I love my country, and I have called for impeachment because I love my country.
Oh. I've called for impeachment because I love my country. So now we're going to cloak impeachment in the cloth of patriotism. Oh, he wasn't done. Al Green tries to tell us that there are now 2 reasons to impeach the president.
And what do you consider to be the key impeachable offenses that the president has committed?
The impeachable offenses are many. The Mueller report gives us a good deal of obstruction of justice that has been committed by the president. Wait
a minute. The Mueller report pointed out that after 2 years, 30+ million or however many dollars we spent, after all of the lawyers, most of whom were Democrat operatives, or at least they tended to lean toward the Democrats, came back and said, no Russian collusion. And we can't find enough evidence that if we were prosecutors, we would go forward with an obstruction case. I got to admit, I really have to admit, the impeachment talk has reached the point where I just wish they would do it. I just wish they would go ahead and pass articles of impeachment on obstruction. Do it now. Don't wait until the primaries, because I want the impeachment articles to be something that every single Democrat nominee, not nominee, but every single Democrat candidate running for the nomination has to answer to.
On the obstruction of justice. But I also have contended and still contend that the president has infused his bigotry into policy. I think this is impeachment.
Wait a minute. Infused his bigotry into policy. And Al Green is about to tell us that being a bigot is an impeachable offense. If that's the case, if being a bigot, if being a dumbass, if being whatever good grief, if this is going to be the basis for impeaching a president, their false belief that Donald Trump is a bigot, my gosh, we're in deep trouble. Al Green continues.
Well, I have indelibly imprinted in my brain that baby standing at the border crying while she is being separated from parents.
I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Was that baby that's been indelibly printed on your brain crying for her mother while waiting to cross? Was that a baby and her mother trying to cross during the Obama administration? during the Bush administration, during the Clinton administration, during the Reagan, the Bush 41 administration, during the Reagan administration. Which one is it, Congressman? Which one is it?
This is not what a great country does. We cannot allow a president to talk about African countries as whole countries and then engage in the process of developing an immigration plan. We can't have a president who's going to say that they're very fine people among the bigots, the racists, the xenophobes, the homophobes who were in Charlottesville, where a woman lost her life protesting against bigotry and do nothing about it. His bigotry is worthy of his being impeached.
His bigotry is worthy of being impeached. We have now, I think, in this example at least, I have talked a lot about thought police and how all speech should be protected. Bigoted speech, hateful speech, the only speech that I think, and even then I have a little bit of a libertarian problem with it, speech that directly incites violence, I do not think is protected by the First Amendment. But speech that is bigoted, I've always said the thing you and I need to worry about is when we start getting into the idea that speech or thought is the basis for criminality. Even though the impeachment process is not a criminal process, this is another step in that direction. If we decide that a high crime and misdemeanor is the fact that in the eyes of some people, some of these things that Al Green says that President Trump has said, which I might add parenthetically, have been taken out of context, that therefore we should impeach him based upon what he thinks or what he says. Wrong. That is crossing that Rubicon into thought police, into newspeak, into the kind of Orwellian world that I'm going to fight every chance I have to oppose. The Me Too movement continues to eat its own. Sheryl Sandberg, who is married to Mark Zuckerberg, she is, I forget what role she plays at Facebook, but she was on CNBC recently talking about the lean in movement and how that is making men afraid to meet with female colleagues. Now, the reason this caught my eye, do you remember back in the 2015-2016 election cycle, and Vice President, well, then candidate Pence, made the comment that he had a policy of never being alone in a room with another woman, not his wife. And the left went ballistic. The left mocked him. The left made fun of that. Well, now, here's how these things go full circle. Now, Sheryl Sandberg, talking over on CNBC, says that this lean-in movement, the Me Too movement, is making men afraid to meet with female colleagues.
You are straight off the stage where you were just talking about lean in and a new study you've just released indicating that women are actually having less access to mentorship and to their bosses than they were even a year ago. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's really important. So today we just released a lean in SurveyMonkey study that shows that 60% of male managers in the United States are afraid to do a one-on-one activity with a woman, including having a meeting. I mean, can you believe that? 60%. A senior man is 9 times more likely to hesitate to travel with a woman and 6 times more likely to hesitate to have a dinner with a woman. And the problem with that is women already weren't getting the same mentorship that men were, particularly women of color.
Oh. So you mean to tell us, Ms. Sandberg, that the Me Too movement has made men so afraid of having one-on-one meetings with a subordinate, or for that matter, a co-equal in the workplace, that is now affecting their ability to break the glass ceiling, that is now affecting their ability to be promoted, and it's having a disproportionate impact on women of color. You see, there are always unintended consequences. We always, I don't know why it is, but we always tend to overreact to all of these things. And this is a classic example of that.
And no one's ever gotten a promotion without getting a one-on-one meeting. And so I think men and women need to be able to travel together. They need to be able to go to meetings together, go to meals together. All of that can be done in public spaces. But those one-on-one conversations, and if there's a man out there who doesn't want to have work dinners with a woman, then he shouldn't have work dinners with a man. You know, group lunches for everyone, if that's how they feel.
It seems like the movements of the past year or so, the Time's Up movement, Me Too, have actually had real negative implications for many women in the workplace. What's your message to corporate America about this?
So I don't believe they've had negative implications. I believe they're overwhelmingly positive because half of women have been sexually harassed. But the thing is, it's not enough. It's really important not to harass anyone, but that's pretty basic. We also need to not be ignored. And so my message is, if we want to change workplace dynamics, you know where the least sexual harassment is? Organizations that have more women in senior leadership roles. And so we need to mentor women. We need to sponsor women. We need to have one-on-one conversations with them that get them promoted. This number's moved up. Last year, it was 46% of men were afraid to have that one-on-one meeting. Today, it's 60%. Both are totally unacceptable.
The lack of self-awareness is just amazing to me. So the number is the percentage of men who are afraid to have a one-on-one meeting with a female subordinate or coworker has increased from 46% to over 60%. And somehow we're supposed to then figure out ways to work around that. I've got two suggestions. How about this? How about men quit being pigs? Yes, because some men are just pigs. Don't make unwanted advances. Don't be a jerk. But second, and I think this is what people are afraid to say. How about this? How about women? You stop making false accusations. Oh, I don't know. I can't think of any recent examples other than, Brett Kavanaugh. How about that? Stop making the false allegations. And while I'm on this tirade, think about what's happening on college campuses. On college campuses, where we're supposed to be teaching all of these mush brains how to deal with reality. If someone, it's almost like, in fact, in some college campuses, if you're going to have sexual intercourse, you do need to have some sort of written contract. It's like you've got to get the lawyers involved, you've got to get witnesses involved, you have to get a notary public, you have to do all of these things if you want to have sexual intercourse while you're dating somebody on a college campus. That's absurd. But even more absurd is the fact that when women make accusations, regardless of whether the accusations are truthful or untruthful, what do we do to the men? What do we do to the men on college campuses? We take away their substantive and procedural rights to due process. We basically tell them, instead of, when you get out in the real world, being innocent until proven guilty of a crime, in this case on the college campus, we're going to act like the communists. And we're going to decide that you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. This is what I mean about the culture. If you grow up in a culture of a college campus that teaches you that you are actually guilty until you prove yourself innocent, unless you fight against that, you're going to leave that college campus with your degree and your $4 bazillion in debt, and you're going to walk out into the real world and think that's the way it should be. You're going to think that, when I was in college, I was guilty until proven innocent, and we've watched so-and-so get charged with a crime, so they must be guilty. Or, my favorite one, I saw somebody on television invoke their constitutional right against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment, and so I immediately concluded, they must be guilty because they've invoked their right against self-incrimination. This is what we do culturally that ends up impacting our public policy. So when Sheryl Sandberg says that more men are now afraid to meet women in public, that is a direct result of the Me Too movement, and that is a direct result of men being too often falsely accused of either. Now look, if there are rape allegations, make the rape allegations, prosecute those if there's legitimate evidence. But what I'm talking about is the whole deal of, I brought him to my dorm room and we were making out and everything got hot and bothered. And I never said no until I decided to say no 3 days later. Well, if you decide to say no 3 days later, I hate to be crass, but guess what? You're 3 days too late. And that's what's affecting the culture. Probably one of the most important newsworthy things that's happened since my last episode of the Michael Brown Unplugged podcast is that I think it was on Friday before the long weekend, the president signed an executive order giving the Attorney General the ability to declassify classified information regarding the origins of the Trump-Russia collusion investigation. And part of that executive order is a requirement that the intelligence community cooperate with the Attorney General in declassifying or at least looking through the materials that were used to initiate this investigation, to initiate the FISA warrants. And my prediction was that by having those documents declassified, by having the Attorney General start an investigation into the origins of the Russian investigation, that would cause a lot of finger pointing to start. Well, guess who started the finger pointing? Comey versus Lynch. Yes, the former Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, and the former FBI Director, James Comey, are now pointing the fingers at each other. Oh, get the popcorn, kids. Get the popcorn. Because the further into this investigation the Attorney General gets, and the more once he does actually begin releasing classified information, the finger pointing is going to get absolutely hilarious.
Welcome back to Fox & Friends. First, former Attorney General Loretta Lynch claims that she never told James Comey to call the Hillary Clinton email probe a matter instead of an investigation.
We were getting to a place where the Attorney General and I were both going to have to testify and talk publicly about it. And I wanted to know, was she going to authorize us to confirm we had an investigation? And she said, yes, but don't call it that. Call it a matter. And I said, why would I do that? And she said, just call it a matter.
Not so fast. Lynch now says the former FBI director mischaracterized her statements. That is according to a newly released transcript of Lynch's testimony on Capitol Hill last year. Lynch also said that she was, quote, surprised that Comey used the word matter in reference to the Clinton email probe. So more to come on that.
And the finger pointing is just beginning. I think the next stage of the finger pointing is going to be between Brennan and Clapper. And I think once those two, former Director of National Intelligence and Director of the CIA, once they start pointing the finger at each other about, well, who approved what, who didn't approve what, who talked to Susan Rice, the Obama's national security advisor, what was said, when was it said? Oh, get a big giant bucket of popcorn, because this is going to be it's just going to be fantastic. It's going to be fantastic. But here's the other thing that I think is absolutely great about it. I want these documents released. I think that we as Americans have a right to know the origins of this investigation. We've spent 2 years. We had a special counsel. We spent $30-40 million on this. We wasted 2 years of the Trump presidency. The report comes out, and even though the report says, the Mueller report, that there was no collusion, and even though the Mueller report said, hey, we couldn't reach any agreement about obstruction, we couldn't build a case on obstruction, nonetheless, they're now talking about impeachment. The criminalizing of our politics has got to stop. And I think one way to do it, which is going to be difficult for the country, don't misunderstand me. I think that once the Attorney General starts to release the classified documents, once we start to learn, okay, was the Steele dossier, was it vetted? No, of course, we know that it wasn't. But once we find out that it wasn't vetted and it was actually presented to a FISA court in order to get wiretaps to spy on the Trump campaign, I think all holy hell is going to break loose. And I think that's going to be good for the country, because I think then in the long run, that's going to show us that when it comes to the power game that is Washington politics, it is out of control. It is no longer Mark my words about this. It is no longer about this public policy versus that public policy. It is about pure, unadulterated power. And in this case, it is the progressive left, it is the fascists in the Democrat Party that want to glom onto power as much as they can, because that would then enable them to enact their socialist policies. This is a real turning point for the country. I don't know what Barr's going to find out. I have my opinions, and my opinion is I think he's going to find out that all of this investigation was originally politically motivated. It wasn't a counterintelligence operation. It wasn't a criminal operation. It was pure and simple a political operation. And I think once we see that, and once we realize that, we're going to, at least I think we will, as people, as the voters, we're going to start demanding much greater accountability on these yahoos that we send to D.C. So Comey and Lynch, that is the first barrage of finger-pointing. But mark my words, it is only the first, and it is certainly not the last. One of the things that occurred over the long Memorial Day weekend was we had, now remember, it's springtime. So in the springtime, particularly in Tornado Alley, you have two things occur. You have cool, moist air meet warm, dry air. That forms what's called a dry line, and thunderstorms blow up sometimes as high as 65,000 feet in the sky, and they spawn tornadoes and severe thunderstorms. The other thing that occurs in the springtime is that you begin to get floods. As the lakes begin to thaw, as the waters begin to come down the Red River and the Mississippi, as the waters begin to come down off the mountains in Colorado, you start to get floods every single spring because it's springtime. The weather's warming up. But that's not the world that we live in. Now it is all about climate change. And it's all about we need to be scared because 48 million Americans are going to be affected by severe storms. Well, it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time. And in fact, well, let's just hear it. Let's go to ABC News first. This was over the Memorial Day weekend.
And good evening. It is great to have you with us on a busy Friday night. I'm Tom Yamas, in for David. And as we come on the air right now, we're getting reports of tornadoes on the ground, tornadoes hitting all day. This as nearly 43 million Americans travel this holiday weekend. Tornado alerts now in 3 states, and Oklahoma has a state of emergency. This twister in the town of Canadian, Texas, one of more than 100 across the country this week. And this tornado near Table Grove, Illinois, one of several reported just today. The threat also from severe storms and heavy rains. Neighborhoods in Tulsa completely underwater. And this man rescued after being trapped in his vehicle for hours. Tonight, the alerts now stretching from Texas all the way to the Great Lakes, and a new risk of extreme heat for the southeast.
Do you know how many times in my lifetime during the spring that I've heard about tornado swarms or floods? It happens every year. Well, I shouldn't say every year. Some are worse than others. But if all we do is listen to the network news, you would think that this is the first time it happened, that it's the worst that it's ever been, and that now 48 million Americans that wanted to travel over the Memorial Day weekend are going to be affected by severe storms. Well, yes, that's because the population of the United States continues to increase. And so every, 4 years, 5 years, every 10 years, the number of people that are going to necessarily be impacted by severe storms is necessarily going to increase. It's like saying, oh my gosh, the property damage from a hurricane hitting Miami-Dade County is the worst that it's ever been. Well, do you think anybody ever stops and thinks that, yes, the property damage in Miami-Dade County is worse this year because of the new condos, because of the new shopping centers, because of the new commercial development, because of the new highways, because of the new bridges, because of the influx of people moving into Florida from other states? Did anybody ever stop to say to themselves, oh, Well, yes, the amount of property damage is much greater than it was, say, 5 years ago, because the amount of development has increased and the numbers of people have increased. Nobody ever says that. We have this myopic vision that everything that is happening right now is the worst that it's been, the most costly that it's ever been, and we never sit and critically think about, well, yeah, this has always been happening. So when a hurricane, for example, hit Miami-Dade County in the 1700s, property damage probably wasn't very great. Or for that matter, when the same dry lines formed in Tornado Alley and they moved up through Texas and Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, on up through the Midwest, do you think the property damage then was as great as it is now? Well, of course not, because there were not as many people. There wasn't as much development. But the news media is the absolute worst, because they want you listening to that, 22 minutes of a 30-minute newscast. They want you to think, oh my gosh, this is the worst that it's ever been, and the world is coming to an end. It's almost like they want us to live in fear all the time. And if they can do it without any context whatsoever, without any historical perspective, then you will live in fear. You'll live in fear because what they're telling you is, oh my gosh, this is the worst it's ever been. Maybe we should ask, why is that? Climate change? Well, no, because the climate's been changing ever since the earth was formed by God Almighty. Is it worse now that we're driving SUVs? Well, no. We had horrible hurricanes back in the 1800s or the early 1900s. We had severe hurricanes even before that. But we're just supposed to believe that it's happening now, and this is the worst ever. That lack of perspective drives me nuts. When I got to the undisclosed location for the long weekend, I jumped in the shower, and I'd been traveling and wrestling with the dogs and stuff, and so I jumped in the shower, and I was going to shave, and I realized I use now, this is not a commercial, but I use Harry's products. I use Harry's razors, and I use some Harry shave cream, and I started using it because the Gillette products that I used, even when I bought them at Sam's, were just horribly expensive. And so I was frustrated when I jumped in the shower and I couldn't find my Harry's razor. Now, stupid me realized it was hidden behind some body wash, but that's neither here nor there. I instead jumped out of the shower, probably TMI, right? I jumped out of the shower. I opened my drawer, and there was a Gillette razor in there, so I used the Gillette razor. In retrospect, I'm embarrassed. I am really embarrassed that I used a Gillette razor. You may recall that there was a time just a short time ago when consumers were not forcibly made aware of the politics of a particular company. Perhaps the producers of your favorite popcorn were agnostic druids who never met a trade embargo they didn't like. They couldn't stand the Federal Reserve. They voted for Ross Perot. They craved a ban on 11-inch knives. And they protested in their civvies at every normal rally west of the Mississippi. But you would never know that. But then comes along Gillette. You may or may not recall, just a few months ago, Gillette slapped a few teeth out of the American male with this commercial they did about an ode to toxic masculinity. In April, it championed the conquering victories of the morbidly obese. They tweeted out a photograph of a woman, I guess trying to push their feminine shaving products under the Gillette Venus name, of a woman who is, I'm not a doctor, I'm a Juris Doctor, but I'm not a medical doctor. I would venture to say that this woman may be morbidly obese in the photograph that I'm looking at. But now Gillette they've jumped the shark. They released an ad Saturday that introduces a girl pondering her identity. In a deep voice, the young woman talks to the camera about finding herself.
I was always trying to figure out what kind of man I wanted to become, and I'm still trying to figure out what kind of man that I want to become. I always knew I was different. I didn't know that there was a term for the type of person that I was. I went into my transition just wanting to be happy. I'm glad I'm at the point where I'm able to shave. South, south, north, north, east, west, never in a hurry. Right.
One. Now don't be scared. Don't be scared. Shaving is about being confident. Oh, you're doing fine. You are doing fine.
I'm at the point in my manhood where I'm actually happy. It's not just myself transitioning, it's everybody around me transitioning.
No. If you could just see it, it is absolutely, well, it's just bizarre. Now, Gillette, in case you didn't know, used to have a tagline, the best a man can get. Now, this campaign, you have to say, in all honesty, is bold. But why would a company spend marketing resources to a group that is so small and do so at the risk of, now that's in concert with the ad they did back in April about the morbidly obese woman. Why would they spend precious marketing resources turning off a larger portion of their customer base? I ask this as a simple business question. If you're in business school, or you teach in business at a business school, or you've ever thought about getting your MBA, why would you spend marketing dollars on a segment of the society that, even if you gathered all of that market share, of that very slim sliver of market share, it wouldn't even be a blip in your overall market share? I don't get it. The only thing I do get is the virtue signaling. We now live in a society where it doesn't make any difference. Remember I talked about there are no guardrails? Well, I think this is an example of, because this is a result of not having guardrails. If it is okay for a person to identify as whatever gender they want to, and they can flip back and forth with their genders, then that means no guardrails. Men get to compete in women's sports, which I would think would make all the Title IX people irritated, but apparently I don't know anything. Why would you spend those marketing resources to go after such a slim margin of people that might even, well, first of all, think about the numbers of people that will never even see this commercial. I don't get it. All I do get is, when you don't have guardrails, you start getting virtue signaling, because now nobody wants to put an ad on television or radio or in a newspaper or on a website that somehow can be seen as less than virtuous, as less than virtue signaling. And so now here you've got Gillette going after a woman who's transitioning to be a man, and there is what I ostensibly understand to be her father teaching her how to shave. And I don't mean her armpits and I don't mean her legs, teaching her how to shave her face. You know, the thing that I find funny about it, I despise shaving. I hate to shave. I would, of course, it'd take me like 2 years to grow enough beard to look like a terrorist. But if I just quit shaving, I would eventually look like a terrorist. Yeah. And if you think that is somehow a racist comment, well, then you know what? You just don't get the joke. But because it would take me forever to grow that much facial hair. But I despise shaving. And I'm so glad that I found my Harry's razor, because having now seen the Gillette commercial, yeah, I threw away the Gillette razor. Yeah, I don't need to be virtue signaled. Gillette, you go after that market share, because even if you get all of it by losing me, you probably have a net loss. What do you shave with? So speaking of virtue signaling, there's a website called Ask Men, ASKMEN. Now, you can't stop being Caucasian or Mongoloid or Negroid. You are one of the three races, and that is an immutable characteristic that you will live with the rest of your life. But you can stop being a man. I wasn't aware of this. Now, if you're not ready to go to the full Bruce Jenner route, with castration and the pharmaceutical alterations, well, that's okay. You can still cultivate unmanliness. Ask Men offers advice on how to accomplish this in an article. This is what happens when you're at the undisclosed location. You start going down rabbit holes, and this rabbit hole just absolutely blew my mind. Ask Men offers advice on how to accomplish getting rid of your manliness. Now, women, the women that listen to the podcast, I want you to pay attention, close attention to this, because I want you to ask your manly man about how many of these skills he has and how many of these skills he is willing to get rid of. The obsolete skills include the following. Number 1, hunting. Men should do more cooking rather than procuring food, according to the website. Number 2, fighting. Men should not confront people physically, verbally, or emotionally. Now, generally, I try not to confront people physically because, well, I don't want to get into a fight. And as any good martial arts teacher, as any good Navy SEAL, as anybody will tell you that is really accomplished in self-defense, if you have the opportunity to run and avoid the fight, run and avoid the fight. So I tend not to confront people physically. Verbally, I got to admit I'm probably somewhat guilty of that. Emotionally, I don't know. I guess I'm just too much of a man to know whether or not I confront people too emotionally. But so number 1 is hunting. You've got to quit hunting. 2, you got to quit fighting. 3, you got to quit repairing your car. What possible use, they ask, could there be to knowing how to repair your own car? You should be saving the planet by using public transit. Now, I have to admit, let's see, I can change the oil, I can change the air filter, I can change the oil filter. I can fix a flat tire. I can't mess with the brakes. I can replace my battery. I can replace a lot of the bulbs, including the headlight bulbs, although I'm not sure my alignment would be very good. But I'm not really very good about repairing cars, and particularly modern cars. With all the computer stuff, this is why God made mechanics. So all you mechanics out there, an example, being a mechanic is a good alternative to going to college. Number 4, fixing things at home. Now, I'm not going to invite Tamara into my little studio here in the undisclosed location, because if she were to get on the podcast right now and tell you about my ability to fix things at home, well, okay, here's my deal. My deal is I think that I can fix some things. I don't have the patience. I severely lack in patience. But you know what has overcome some of that patience? YouTube. So if there's something, particularly here at the undisclosed location, where to get somebody, in New Mexico, you soon learn that mañana does not mean tomorrow. It means not today. So if you're trying to get a plumber, an electrician, or a contractor out to do something, and they tell you, well, I can't do it today, that's really basically them telling you, yeah, I'll get to it when I can get to it. And you never know when that's going to be. So down here, I've overcome some of that through YouTube. Oh, yeah. You can learn to do almost anything on YouTube. But anyway, back to Ask Men. They think you should lose those skills. You should quit fixing things at home. They say that's bad because, quote, the idea that a man owns his house and should therefore know how to take care of it is increasingly an outdated concept. Seriously? I like this next one. Number 5 on our list of manly things you should disavow. Being a leader. You know why? Well, according to the article, we don't want men's top-down leadership, but rather open communication between coworkers of all genders. Well, I'm all for open communication between coworkers, but why do they have to throw in about all genders? Really? We have to worry about that? Number 6, if you got rugrats at home, you know this next one's BS. You should quit being a disciplinarian. Now, the article says, in the olden days, meaning 2008, in the olden days, men taught their sons, quote, how to shoot, how to fight, how to push through their pain, how to overcome their fears. Well, according to the article, the olden days were sexist and bad. Boys need wet nurses and therapists now, not fathers. You know, actually, can I make a serious comment real quickly? I tend to think that part of the problem with American society, and it's probably can be extrapolated to most other cultures too, is that we don't have enough fathers. Yeah, we don't have enough fathers that are true fathers that are in the lives of their children. And I don't care whether your children are grown or they're rugrats. It doesn't make any difference. I think being a father and involved in the life of your children is part of what holds society together. Yeah, that'll tick some people off. Number 7. But don't forget, number 6, you have to quit being a disciplinarian. So the next time you're in a grocery store or a restaurant and you see the young couple and they're letting their kids just run all over the place, they're trying to bribe the kids, they're trying to do everything they can except actually discipline the kids, I want you to think back to this discussion, to this story. And instead of looking at them and being critical, being judgmental, no, I know you would never do that. I would, but I know you would never do that. Instead of being judgmental and critical and looking at those poor mothers and those poor fathers dealing with those unruly rugrats, stop and think to yourself, maybe they read the same article that Michael Brown read, and they're just not being disciplinarians. They're being wet nurses. They're being a therapist. They're being their child's best friend. Number 7, holding your emotions in. Stoicism, it says, is part of the bad past. Emotional incontinence is now regarded as emotional maturity. I just like the phrase emotional incontinence. Doesn't that pretty much sum up the people that wrote this article? So here is the dumbass's guide to unmanliness. The obsolete skills are hunting, fighting, repairing your car, fixing things at home, being a leader, being a disciplinarian, holding your emotions in. You got to stop all of those. And women, if you're listening, you march right into that man right now. You slap him across the face and say, look, I got a list of 7 things that Michael Brown says you got to stop doing, and you got to stop doing them right now. And then send me an email, michael@michaelbrowntoday.com. Tell me, how'd that work out for you? I'd like to know. I didn't check my investments or the markets over the weekend, and it's too early on Tuesday morning to find out what they're doing. I haven't even looked at the futures. But if you're an investor in Tesla, you might be interested in this story, because it looks like Tesla is going to need some more big government subsidies. The story goes, Tesla, now it's a $35 billion company, at least on paper, is now refusing to provide toilet paper for its employees at some locations. After Elon Musk's email days ago about hardcore cost cutting and the company literally pulling every lever that it possibly can to try and cut costs, Electric is now reporting that the result is that some employees are not being provided with toilet paper. Who would have thought that Tesla could become even more environmentally correct? Sheryl Crow must be seen clapping her hands in approval somewhere. Now, I said earlier that I'm not a medical doctor. I am a juris doctor, so you should call me Dr. Brown. And I don't know about you, but I kind of like roller coasters. I love going to amusement parks, although I don't do it very often. And I like roller coasters. But have you ever heard the words kidney stones and roller coasters together in a sentence? I hadn't either. But apparently that's a real thing. There's a team of researchers that rode a roller coaster one too many times than they should have in an attempt to figure out why roller coasters trigger the passage of small kidney stones. Yep, with the help of a 3D printer model of a kidney with urine, scientists have solved the mystery, or so they think. The Journal of the American Osteopathic Association has a study by urologist David Wardinger and his colleagues at Michigan State University. They have presented evidence to support the wider claim that riding a roller coaster with modern intensity can help people pass small kidney stones. Now, why is this good? Well, this could help in the development of a rather unconventional therapy for patients worldwide. You see, kidney stones are this mass of salts and chemicals that end up in your urine, and the passing of the stones can be an excruciating experience. Now, fortunately, I've never had stones, so I don't know, but friends of mine who have had tell me that it really is pretty nasty. The bigger they are, the harder they are to pass, which is why it's crucial to get them out before they get too large to reduce risk and discomfort. Now, urologists are familiar with common triggers, but prior to this study, nobody has virtually tried to find out what easily prompts a kidney stone to pass through the urinary canal. Now, it's common for pregnant women to pass kidney stones because of their increased vitamin intake. But physical labor will sometimes loosen it, as well as bouncing on a trampoline, bungee jumping, dirt bike riding, and the most ridiculous thing of all, sneezing. Yeah, I had a friend who actually passed a stone one time, sneezing. But the truth of the matter is, scientists have not been able to isolate a single trigger, which is why roller coasters seem to play an important and an even reproducible role. So this doctor stated his decision for the study was after he saw how a series of his students returned from spring break with stories of passing kidney stones after riding the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Walt Disney World in Orlando. He explained how the moment his students and he realized they had to conduct a full study was when the patients stated they rode the coaster 3 times, and after each consecutive ride, they passed a stone. Now, here's what I think's really going on. They wanted to get a grant to do a study, to go to roller coasters all around the world to see which ones are the most effective. But I think there's another thing to think about in terms of this. If roller coasters are a way to gently and easily pass a kidney stone, is now traveling to an amusement park to ride a roller coaster, if you have a kidney stone, is that a tax-deductible medical expense? Not that I would ever do anything like that. Just curious. And last but not least, simply because we've not heard from Auntie Maxine in such a long time, she's out there again pushing impeachment.
Agreement with congressional leaders to delay handing over those bank records. So what happens now? Joining me now is Congresswoman Maxine Waters, chair of the Financial Services Committee. And Congresswoman, happy Sunday. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. Delighted to be here with you.
So can we talk about this deal that's been made to essentially delay the handover of the records of Deutsche Bank and others? Is your committee one of the committees that's a party to that deal, and what does it mean?
Well, that is being negotiated, and simply because the Judge Ramos, for example, ruled on the preliminary injunction, did not rule on the merits of the case. And we believe that if, in fact, the Trump lawyers are asking for, time, that we should show that we're willing to be cooperative. We think it works in our favor. And so it does not mean that the subpoenas will not be honored. It just simply means that there is a delay. That the subpoenas have to be responded to.
And we know that the Trump family has appealed the rulings that are allowing banks, including Deutsche Bank, to hand over records, including to your committee. You're saying that they'll eventually, you believe you will obtain the records and that they will be made available to the public?
Oh, I think so. Like I said, Judge Ramos was pretty clear about what he said, that he believes that we have a right to them. Again, he didn't rule on the merits of the case, but he certainly ruled on the preliminary injunction so that he determined that we have a right to have that information. And so the appeal that has been filed by the Trump people just, carries it out a little bit longer, and they have to get ready with the briefings. And once the briefings are decided, the time for the oral arguments to be made in the court will probably end up around the latter part of July.
And the other question is whether or not any of this might end up around during the heat of the election. There's a piece in Politico that talks about the fact that the IRS could actually be forced to release Donald Trump's tax returns because ultimately they are going to lose that case, most people believe. It says federal courts are already ruling quickly against Trump in his other attempts to block Congress. The Supreme Court could also be a dead end if the case doesn't present new legal issues or divide appellate courts. And I realize that's House Ways and Means. It's a different committee than but could it be that the delays wind up putting both the tax returns and the bank records out right in the heat of the 2020 election?
Well, we absolutely cannot determine the absolute court calendar, but it is possible that, for example, once the appeals case has been ruled on, that there could be a request to have the case heard, what they call en banc, or they could ask to go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court could decide to hear the case or not hear the case. The whole court, I guess, could end up hearing the case. And we just don't know exactly what that timing would be. But it could stretch out longer than any of us would like it to stretch out.
Oh, no. You want it to stretch out. You want it to occur right in the heart of the election. That's what all of this is about. The subpoenas, trying to get the tax returns, trying to get the financial records, all of that is about the 2020 election. Let me just say this now. Might as well just get ready because in probably, another 30 days or so, we're going to start having the first of the Democrat presidential debates. Everything that you hear between now and November of 2020 is about November of 2020. Anything the Democrats do is about that. And quite honestly, anything on the Republican side is about 2020. So whether you have these message bills, whether you have bills that both parties know is never going to get past the Congress or the Senate or vice versa, it is all about positioning themselves for the 2020 election. So now that we're essentially into the summer season, get ready, because here we go. It's election time, baby. It's election time already. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Brown Unplugged podcast. Just a quick reminder, michaelbrowntoday.com. You can find all the social media icons there, and you can now subscribe to us on iTunes. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.